It started with a letter, a small, plain white envelope tucked into my mailbox like a tiny bomb waiting to go off. I remember the moment I noticed it, sandwiched between a few coupons and a tired-looking grocery flyer. Something about its neat handwriting set my nerves on edge, as if I already sensed this was no ordinary piece of mail. Little did I know that small envelope would spark the wildest, most emotionally charged battle of my life, one that would threaten everything I held dear. I tore the letter open, half expecting some mundane reminder about taxes or a local fair, but the single line of bold text made my stomach twist. Violation notice. Your barn does not comply with HOA aesthetics. Fine, $250. What? My family's barn had stood on this land for almost a century. How could anybody in their right mind think they had the power to fine me over its appearance? By the time I finished reading, my head was spinning. Hey everyone, before we dive deeper into this roller coaster, don't forget to subscribe, smash that like button, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for the entire story. It only gets more bizarre, more dramatic, and more hilarious, and you won't believe what happens by the end. The next morning, I woke up feeling uneasy. I tried to convince myself it was just the stress of daily farm work. Maybe I was overreacting. People make mistakes, right? Some bureaucrat must have typed in the wrong address. Happens all the time. But when I opened my mailbox, there was another envelope, identical to the first. My chest got tight as I tore it open, the same crisp lettering, the same smug tone. This time the fine amount was different, more random. Violation notice. Your barn does not comply with HOA aesthetics. Fine, $2.50 ***. It made no sense at all. The confusion mingled with my rising anger. Was this some kind of prank? A glitch? A scam? The barn in question wasn't just any building. It was the heart of my dairy farm, a weathered red structure with thick timbers and a pitched roof that had sheltered generations of cows, and at times the entire family during storms. My great-grandfather built it with his own hands. Every faded plank told a story of hard work and love for the land. The thought of anyone calling it unsightly or non-compliant felt like an insult to everything my family had poured into this soil. I've always believed that if you love what you do, you never truly work a day in your life. For me, that love was farming. Each morning, I'd head out before sunrise to greet my cows, a gentle, soft-eyed bunch that I affectionately called the girls. They'd often walk up to the fence, waiting for me to give them an affectionate pat on the head. We produced some of the finest milk in the region, which I turned into cheese that sold out at local shops faster than you could say sharp cheddar. The routine was as comforting as the first sip of hot coffee on a cold morning. I'd check the milking machines, gather fresh hay, inspect the barn for repairs, and maybe hum a tune my grandfather taught me. I loved the smell of the fields, the quiet hush of dawn, and the knowledge that my work fed dozens of families. It was honest labor, and every drop of sweat felt like proof of my dedication. So reading those letters, claiming my barn, my cows, my livelihood were unfit for the so-called aesthetic of a homeowners association, felt like a personal attack. This wasn't just about a building's color or some obscure regulation. It was an assault on my heritage. It set off a spark of anger deep in my chest, one that would soon burn hotter than I ever expected. I hoped it would end with the second letter. Perhaps they'd realize I wasn't even in their HOA. My farm was on the outskirts of town, way beyond any official boundary lines for suburban developments. That should have been the end of it. But if it had ended there, I wouldn't be telling you this story. A few days later, a sharp knock on my door rattled the entire frame. I opened it to find Karen Whitmore, and let me tell you, she was the walking definition of a cliché. Her short, bleach-blonde hair was sprayed into a rigid shape that looked like it could withstand a hurricane. Her beige pantsuit matched her beige heels, which matched her beige clipboard. Even her nails looked beige. The only spot of color was the furious red on her face as she sneered up at me. "Mr. Callahan," she intoned, dragging out my name like it was some unspeakable slur. "I'm here on behalf of the Oakridge HOA. We have to address your multiple violations." I stared at her for a good few seconds, waiting for a punchline that never came. Then I said as politely as I could, "I'm not part of your HOA." Her plastic smile faltered. "That's where you're mistaken," she said, tapping her clipboard with a long manicured finger. "According to this document, your property has recently been zoned into Oakridge jurisdiction. You are therefore subject to our bylaws and the associated fines for noncompliance." I couldn't help but let out a single disbelieving laugh. "Lady, this barn has been here since the 1920s. There's no way you can just redraw lines and claim my land." Karen raised an eyebrow. "The law is the law," she said, voice dripping with condescension. "You have 1 week to remove all non-compliant structures and livestock, or we'll have no choice but to escalate matters." She turned on her heel and stomped back to her shiny SUV, leaving me in the dust. Little did I know that was just the opening salvo in what would become an all-out war. My frustration mounted with every passing day. More letters, more nonsensical fines, more talk of violations. I tried to ignore them, focusing instead on milking my cows, making cheese, and repairing the old tractor. I even wrote a letter back once, explaining that my farm was outside HOA limits. No response, just more letters, each snarkier than the last. Then came the night I discovered my fence had been cut. It was around 5 a.m. when I stepped outside, expecting the usual calm before sunrise. Instead, I found splintered fence posts and a gaping hole leading into my fields, and right in the middle of the opening stood a bright metal sign staked into the ground, "Future Site of Oakridge HOA Community Dog Park." My anger flared like a brush fire. That sign was an insult, a challenge, a declaration of war. It wasn't enough that Karen was pestering me with pointless fines. Now she was actively staking a claim on my family's heritage? Fury pulsed in my veins, but so did a grim sense of determination. I'd be damned if I let her bulldoze my farm for a dog park. I ran to check my security cameras, flipping through the footage until I found exactly what I expected. 3 shadowy figures cutting through the fence under cover of darkness. The resolution was low, but there was no mistaking Karen's silhouette or that ridiculous stance with the clipboard clutched to her chest like a medieval shield. She pointed, her 2 lackeys nodded, and they hammered in that dog park sign like they were conquering new land. "Unbelievable," I muttered, teeth clenched. If Karen wanted a battle, she was about to get one. My first call was to the sheriff's department. They sounded polite, but non-committal. "We'll make a report," the deputy said. "But HOAs are tricky. You sure it's not a civil matter?" "Civil matter? They'd trespassed and destroyed my property." Yet the officer sounded bored, like he'd seen 100 of these disputes. I could practically hear him rolling his eyes. Next, I rang up Hank, my lawyer. He was an old family friend, a grizzled man who could cuss the paint off a barn, but spoke with the authority of someone who'd handled cases bigger than the entire Oakridge HOA combined. When I explained the situation, he let out a low whistle. "She cut your fence, planted a sign on your land, and threatened legal action?" he asked, incredulous. "Yep," he whistled again. "That's some next-level lunacy, my friend. We'll press charges for trespassing and vandalism for starters. But be warned, people like Karen never play fair. She'll have some angle. You need to keep your eyes open." Over the next week, the intensity soared. Karen wasn't just content to harass me about the barn. She sent me warnings about my cows, claiming they were a nuisance. Then word trickled down that she was contacting animal rights groups, telling them I was mistreating livestock for profit. If it weren't so infuriating, I'd have laughed until I cried. One sunny afternoon, a caravan of activists arrived at my gate. They carried signs with slogans like "Save the Cows" and "No More Barn Slavery." I was stunned. Sure, there are plenty of legitimate concerns about animal welfare, but if they'd known how much I cared for my dairy cows, they'd realize how absurd it was to accuse me of cruelty. Trying to be polite, I invited them onto my property. They came in, cameras rolling, probably hoping to catch me in some brutal act of cow torture. Instead, they saw meticulously clean stalls, soft bedding, top-notch feed, and gentle cows wandering freely in a large pasture. When I demonstrated how I milked them with modern, humane equipment, a few of the activists seemed visibly disappointed to find no scandal. By the time they left, Many apologized for the intrusion, promising to clarify that my farm was run with exemplary care. Karen, however, fumed like a kettle left on the stove too long. She accosted me later, red-faced, arms flailing, screeching that I'd tricked the activists with some kind of elaborate setup. I calmly told her, "Truth doesn't need tricks, Karen." Her face turned a shade of purple I didn't even know existed. Despite all this madness, life on the farm had to go on. My cows still needed feeding, milking, and general TLC. Plus, I had orders piling up for my cheese. Neighbors and local stores adored the fresh, creamy texture, and I refused to let them down. But Karen wouldn't let up. She began circulating rumors that I was flying illegal drones over the neighborhood, invading everyone's privacy. The truth? I did have a small drone, an off-the-shelf model I used to monitor my fields at night. When you run a large piece of land, it's a fantastic tool to check for broken fences or straying livestock without having to roam in the dark. One evening, I caught something unusual on my screen, a cluster of lights hovering near my barn. At first, I thought they were fireflies or reflections, but they moved too smoothly. I stepped outside with my flashlight, prepared for the worst. Sure enough, 3 large drones buzzed ominously overhead, their rotors cutting through the quiet night air. Someone was spying on my property, and it didn't take a detective to guess who. I followed the sound to the edge of my farm, where a figure crouched behind some tall grass. I flicked on my flashlight and discovered a neighbor I recognized vaguely, fiddling with a fancy drone controller. Standing next to him, in all her stiff-haired glory, was Karen. "Turn off your drone!" she shrieked the moment she saw me. "You're violating our airspace and endangering the entire community!" I let out a weary sigh. "Karen, these are your drones and you're trespassing again." She jabbed a finger in my direction, practically shaking with righteous fury. "Don't lie to me! I know you've been filming private property. This is a violation of my constitutional rights." Her meltdown was so spectacular, it was almost art. She flailed her arms, brandishing that clipboard like a medieval sword. Meanwhile, my drone, recording the entire fiasco, whirred overhead. In her desperation, Karen tried to yank it down from the sky, hopping up and down like a rabid soccer mom trying to catch a runaway ball. One miscalculated leap later, the drone's landing legs got tangled in her shellacked hair. She screeched in panic, spinning in frantic circles while the drone buzzed like an angry hornet. By the time she freed herself, half her hair stood out in a stiff, sideways nest, making her look like some comedic villain from a kid's cartoon. The footage would have gone viral instantly if I'd posted it. But I chose to keep it as evidence, at least for now. I should have known Karen wouldn't be humiliated quietly. Less than 2 days after the drone debacle, a large envelope arrived by courier, a lawsuit from the Oakridge HOA, claiming that my land was rightfully theirs due to recent zoning expansions and that my livestock, barn, and dairy operations were all non-compliant with their precious regulations. Adding insult to injury, they demanded I pay a staggering series of fines. The total amount could have replaced my entire herd of cows. They even labeled my beloved barn an eyesore and alleged I was using drones to harass community members. The whole thing read like a script from a dystopian reality show. I took the papers to Hank, who snorted so loudly he almost dropped them. "This is next-level nonsense," he said, scanning each page. "But be prepared, they've got big-name lawyers. This won't be cheap or quick." We filed a countersuit for trespassing, vandalism, harassment, and defamation. Hank insisted we include drone footage of Karen's meltdown for good measure. "A judge needs to see exactly what we're dealing with," he said, grinning. In the meantime, Karen turned up the heat. She spread rumors around town, crazy stuff like I was operating some kind of secret black market cheese lab, or that my cows were genetically modified mutants. Each rumor was more outlandish than the last. Most locals knew better, but a few busybodies took it seriously, whispering behind my back whenever I stopped by the hardware store or feed supply. The sense of being hunted, of having every inch of my beloved land under scrutiny, weighed on me like a stone around my neck. Yet every time I felt despair creeping in, I'd remind myself why I was fighting. My farm was my life, my legacy. I'd do whatever it took to protect it. Hank and I weren't about to let Karen's barrage of nonsense overshadow our own investigation. We dug into every HOA document, every rezoning file, every county record from the last decade. Late nights found us hunched over piles of paperwork at Hank's office, occasionally fueled by pizza and strong coffee. Finally, we found it, a small but crucial detail in the official boundaries the Oakridge HOA had filed. Turns out, there had been a clerical error. The document that supposedly put my land within their jurisdiction? It was based on a flawed map that the county had already revised. No one had caught the discrepancy because the HOA's expansions were rarely challenged. People usually caved in fear of legal fees. But not me. Armed with the correct boundary lines, we prepared to blow their lawsuit out of the water. Court day arrived, and let me tell you, the tension in that small-town courthouse was thick enough to slice with a shovel. I sat at one table wearing my best flannel shirt under a decently pressed jacket, while Hank organized our mountain of evidence. Across from us, Karen sat stiffly beside a pricey-looking lawyer in a tailored suit. Her hair was once again teased to the brink of gravity defiance, and her expression radiated smug confidence. The judge, a stern man with deep lines around his eyes, called us to order. Karen's lawyer stood first, launching into a well-rehearsed speech about how I was a danger to community harmony and how my ugly barn and noisy cows violated Oakridge's spirit of neighborly cooperation. I caught glimpses of the audience, some of whom openly rolled their eyes. Then it was Hank's turn. He strode to the front with the calm assurance of a man holding all the aces. "Your Honor," he said, "Mr. Callahan's family has owned that land for close to a century. We have deed records, county maps, and witness statements confirming his farm has never been under HOA jurisdiction." He flipped through a folder thick as a dictionary. "We also have evidence of repeated trespassing and vandalism perpetrated by Miss Whitmore, including video of her personally destroying property." He paused to pass a screen capture to the judge, Karen frozen mid-swing with bolt cutters on my fence. Another showed her comical attempt to wrestle my drone from the air, half her hair tangled in its legs. A small, incredulous smile tugged at the judge's mouth. Karen shifted uncomfortably, her carefully painted face turning splotchy red. Karen's lawyer tried to counter by referencing that flawed document. But Hank was ready. He presented the official county revision that invalidated the older map. The judge studied it for a long, silent minute, then set it on his desk with a resounding thump. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice echoing in the quiet courtroom, "this document clearly shows that Mr. Callahan's land is not part of the Oakridge HOA. Furthermore, the evidence he's provided indicates you trespassed and caused property damage. I see potential grounds for criminal charges." What happened next felt like a scene ripped straight from a soap opera. Karen shot to her feet, nearly knocking over her chair, her face contorted, eyes bulging so wide they looked ready to pop out. Her voice reached a shrill pitch that could probably shatter glass. "This isn't fair," she bellowed, flailing her arms. "He's been defying our rules, our beautiful neighborhood, and he's poisoning the air with the stink of cow manure and—" The judge banged his gavel. "Order!" he barked. But Karen was beyond reason. She stabbed a finger in my direction. "You think you can just hide behind some technicality? I'll... Her words dissolved into a series of strangled gasps, like she was a tea kettle about to blow its lid. Her beige heels squeaked on the polished floor as she stomped in place. Her own lawyer reached out, trying to calm her, but she whirled on him too, eyes filled with furious tears. "Do something!" she shrieked, voice cracking, but he had no moves left. The entire courtroom watched her meltdown in stunned silence. The judge raised the gavel once more firmly this time. "Mrs. Whitmore, sit down. Any further outbursts and I'll hold you in contempt of court." With one last glare in my direction, Karen slumped into her seat, breathing hard. There was a pitiful hush in the room, the kind you hear when a performance ends and everyone's too shocked to clap. The judge cleared his throat. "In light of the evidence, this court dismisses the HOA's claims against Mr. Callahan. Additionally, I am granting Mr. Callahan's request for a restraining order against Miss Whitmore and any designated representatives of Oakridge HOA, prohibiting them from entering his property. Furthermore, the matter of criminal trespassing and vandalism will be referred to the district attorney. I released a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Relief coursed through me, mingled with a fierce sense of vindication. It was over. Karen had lost. The court adjourned, and I walked outside feeling 100 pounds lighter. Hank clapped me on the shoulder, grinning. "Congrats, my friend! You kicked the hornet's nest, and it looks like the hornets stung themselves." But I knew deep down that Karen's brand of crazy didn't just vanish overnight. She might give up for now, or maybe she'd simmer with resentment until she found some new angle. Still, at least for the time being, my land, my family's land, was safe. Neighbors who'd heard about the lawsuit's outcome stopped by with congratulations. Some brought pies, others just offered a warm handshake. Even a few of the activists who'd initially shown up wanting to shut me down returned to buy my cheese or volunteer at the farm, helping me feed and groom the animals. It felt good to see people rally around a cause that was so important to me. Not long after, a for sale sign appeared in front of Karen's immaculate beige house. Within a few weeks, the moving trucks arrived, loading up her carefully coordinated furniture, an endless supply of decorative pillows. Some people said she'd moved to a different state, hoping to find a new neighborhood to dominate. Others joked she'd probably start her own exclusive HOA in the middle of nowhere. Either way, she was gone, and my small town breathed a collective sigh of relief.